Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Brian. I've got Erin here, my co-host, and our special guest, Cassidy Williams. Welcome, Cassidy.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, you get to be our first official guest on the show. So, we just, like I mentioned to you earlier, we just started this up last month because, both of us feel like we've been in DevRel we work in DevRel. We have a lot to say about DevRel. We have lots of friends in DevRel, and we just thought it would be great, a lot of fun.
And a lot to say about pickles.
And a lot to say about pickles, which is
we have a lot of
really,
opinions,
really
about pickles and DevRel. And I mean, Cassidy, you were someone who actually taught me that DevRel was a career, so I can have a flashback moment because I didn't know it was a real legit job for the longest period of time. I was like, and I shared it in the last episode. Like, I went from product to community, like developer community, on total accident, unintentional, and panicked Googled. And your name was someone who came up a lot when I was in my panic Googling phase of 2019 going, what do I do in this job? I have no idea.
Is this terrifying? Real?
Yes.
Yeah. No, it feels like a new job, even though it isn't, because I feel like, there just isn't that awareness. It's something that, like, if you were to major in computer science, a school probably isn't going to tell you that this is the career path to go into or something, just because it's just new enough that you don't see it as often.
Definitely. Speaking of which, we wanted to kind of talk a little bit about how you ended up in DevRel. Because first of all, we could go into a long list of all of the things you've done and all the things you currently do, like Stack Overflow newsletter. You worked for CodePen for a while as well, Amazon, and now you're a CTO. You've kind of wound your way through Netlify DevRel and then moved on to CTO. Yeah. So you've kind of you've definitely had the full DevRel experience at the various levels. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up as in DevRel, where you started and how you ended up there.
Yeah, I honestly started all the way back in college, where I was majoring in computer science and planned on being a software engineer, and that was my plan. And I was really, really involved on campus, where I was leader of computer science club, and I was really involved with women in science and engineering and all of these different organizations. And I really loved going to hackathons and speaking at meetups and stuff. It was just something that I got really, really involved with in school. And I remember when I was applying for jobs, I was just asking, is there something I can do that lets me continue this kind of work? Does that exist? And most places said no. They're just like, oh yeah, you can talk at a meetup or something if you work here. It wasn't really a part of any roles or anything. So I was kind of just applying and seeing what might happen my senior year. And then I went to a hackathon. I think it was Pen Apps was the hackathon, which for anybody who's been in the hackathon scene for a while, I think that was and is a really, really large student hackathon. I just started talking to some of the companies that were sponsoring the event, and I was just like, what's your job? What do you do here? And it turns out some of those people, they were just like, oh, this is my job, actually. It's part of my job to help developers build better and stuff. And that's kind of how I discovered what the role was. And this was 10 years ago now. I'm so old. Oh my gosh. It was 2013 when I discovered that this was an actual career path that people could get into. And so I started, as I was again applying for roles, I started saying, do you have a developer advocate position or developer evangelist position, developer relations? Goes by so many different names. And then my first job out of school was at Venmo, and Venmo was very, very early on in those days. And so I was their first dev advocate, pushing their API and everything. And because none of us fully understood the role, I was also doing software engineering at the same time on the app itself. I burnt out a lot. That was a very busy role, but that is kind of how I got started. And so from Venmo, I went to small startups, big companies like Amazon, like you said, and then companies like Netlify, and I've been doing DevRel ever since. And even in my current role at Contenda, we're building a tool specifically for DevRels. And so even though it's not necessarily my full-time role anymore right now, it's still very much a part of what I like to do.
Yeah, I think, first of all, when you say you're so old,
I'm sorry.
some of us, when you're talking about getting out of college, what, like 13 years ago, you said, like,
Yeah, 10 years ago is when I discovered the role. So yeah.
Yeah, I've been in the
still.
role, for 13 years. And I was a developer for like 12 years before that. So yeah. Anyway, I've got more old than you.
I was gonna say we have the 5, 10, and 15 going on here because I've been out of college, 2015.
Oh yeah, 2014 was me. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go.
Y'all are making me feel old, really.
You're so old, Brian.
I know it. So, okay, so I guess my question would be, I'm curious, given that path that you took, because you actively sought out the role,
Right, when it barely existed, honestly.
Yeah.
I think Twilio was really the main company that was doing it at the time, and the only one that had like a job description for it at that point.
Yeah, I mean, there was some people that because Google had some.
Yeah, Google
Adobe
kind
had
of did.
some.
One of my interviews was at Google, and yeah, like Twilio, SendGrid, lots of companies were touching on it, but I feel like Twilio really was spearheading a lot of it at that point.
Yeah. I think Twilio did kind of change the way it's done. But I'm curious, how did the job end up, like the actual career end up differing from maybe your expectations as like somebody who was looking into it out of college?
Yeah, I think overall the whole field has kind of changed over time, where especially because of the pandemic. I mean, the past 3 years have changed a lot of DevRel stuff, but back then, especially 2013, 2014 time, it was really just like, it was very, very event driven, where I was going to conferences, hackathons, and meetups constantly, and that was it. It wasn't like recording videos or podcasts or making content as much as it was just being in the room all the time and traveling a lot and being a presence in a lot of spaces, which there's still elements of that, but it does feel like that isn't the number one thing as much anymore. And it definitely kind of transformed over time into more, how do you make things more like evergreen, where it's not just, you gave a talk at that conference, good for you, bye, where it's, you gave a talk at this conference, but it is a blog post now that you were able to write about that conference and what you spoke on, or you recorded a video of that, or you have podcast episodes that people can refer to and that sort of thing. So I do think that the strategy overall has changed over time. And in those early days, for quite a few years, I was traveling so much to go to so many conferences and meetups and events and everything. And now I'll still speak at them and stuff, but once again, things are more virtual now, and now people will prefer doing live streams from the comfort of their home a lot more, and doing a lot more of the stuff where you can look at it async, because that's kind of the direction the world is going in.
Absolutely. Yeah, that job I used to cut, like, that was the road warrior.
Yeah.
And I think some people still do it.
People do.
I've definitely seen it, and it's interesting having entered the space. My first community title working with developer communities was 2020. I was doing stuff unofficially, or as like a user experience person, or I did user experience and user research. So I was still very involved in it, but in a different side of things. So like, I didn't have, I see people move into the space and they're like completely new. And I feel like I had a little bit of an advantage to that, because like I already was like, oh, I know how to do the user research. I know how to be a product manager.
Right.
Like on this side, instead of like being like, here's your pain points, I'm like, here, let me go celebrate the wins. And like, I'm not going to follow that ticket anymore in Jira. Oh, darn. Like I kind of feel like I'm on the fun side now. Like, I joke that I went from following tickets to making tickets or breaking our product more. That's
the fun part.
More fun than that's the fun part. And so, but like even in those years that I've done it, you know, now kind of turning the corner year 3, going on to year 4, it's really, and, you know, I say that explicitly in relation to titles, but in that time, I have never really done the road warrior thing. Like a lot of it was using user groups or bringing people to me, and I've done conferences and I've done the season, but it's like, okay, you're traveling for 2 weeks, but then it's more about the evergreen content, or they find out I never studied anything technical. So they find out I have a journalism background and they're like, content, journalism background, content. I'm like, right. You're right. I'm like, okay, got it. Noted.
Yeah. Yeah. My last job before the pandemic, and it's actually kind of wild because the company shut down exactly 3 years ago today, I think. But I was at a company called React Training where we were teaching React, and the Road Warrior thing was real. It was a full-time traveling job where January 2020, I was home for 1 weekend. And then that was pretty much the one time where I was home, and I was just going back to back travel, because that's just what you did. I was teaching workshops and I was helping people learn React, and I was speaking at conferences, and it's a very different world now.
Do you think, on that note of being different world, do you think, because I always felt like at a certain point that has diminishing returns, like, right? This is so expensive to like participate in the
seriously
conference, particularly if you're sponsoring, and then the travel and you know,
travel, lodging, food.
Yeah, and so that. Like it's a very high cost thing, and then like I could show up and I have no control over when I get scheduled or anything. So like, and I show up, and if I'm up against you know, a Cassidy Williams.
It's not a competition.
That suddenly might that's suddenly like I might be speaking to like a room full of like 10 people, and we spent like, you know,
so much money to
get me out there to speak to 10 people. I mean, do you think that's part of the change? Are companies kind of realizing that, or do you think it's just really been a shift in the mindset of like the actual people?
If I can, I'm gonna
sorry,
interject also. I was going to interject one part I want to tag onto the back of that question as well, which is who owns that events strategy? Because I think that's a conversation we don't have enough, is like, you know, always in my time, I've like, if I'm in community or developer relations, I know that a lot of my effort is going to do a lot of that direct outreach to reaching out to people, but that's time consuming in its own right.
Right.
And maybe, is that a marketing function? Should that fall under DevRel-ish?
Right. Relish. Haha. You brought up the name of the show. Well, and I think that's where the lines have gotten a lot more fuzzy, because with again, in the shift in strategies and stuff, it has become less marketing-y and more like under its own umbrella as an entity of DevRel. But I think when events were such a major part of it, it involved marketing spend in addition to DevRel spend, and so it was kind of like a co-strategy type of thing. And I think the one thing that I really miss about the constant in-person events and things where I'm like, I don't think they're going to go away fully ever, is that hallway track in between conference talks, where there might be a point where, sure, there's like the really, really big companies like, I don't know, the Twilios of the world with massive budgets. And then there's a small company that might compete with them, but they're still at the event. And you could still talk to them, and you might learn something that you wouldn't have normally learned because you're not Googling it specifically, or you don't necessarily see them. Where in one of the last events that I did in 2020, for example, I met the Mux team. They're an API for making video stuff. I knew nothing about that. I didn't know that they existed, but they were at the event and they had socks. And I was like, I want free socks. I'll talk to them. And to this day, I've interacted with them multiple times over the past few years on content at different conferences and so many things, because I had that human connection in between talks. So I do think that there is a place for that, where sure, there might only be a handful of people that actually attend your talk, but you're still in the room with a lot of people that could end up being really fruitful relationships over time.
Very true, very true. I'm not thinking they're going to go away. I feel like I see
it's a different purpose.
Yeah, I see far fewer of the companies with like, it used to be DevRel, at least to me, like early on, it it was all road warriors, and I was kind of an exception, being somebody who wasn't that. I might do like half a dozen, like between 6 and 10 conferences a year, which wasn't anything like what they were doing, and I focused more on content, and so like that was, I felt like I was a rarity. Those jobs were hard to find, and now I think it's kind of flipped, and it's more about content and less about the road warrior.
Right. And which I think is generally more accessible too, where like, yes, you need to be able to like have a camera and like have a setup that allows you to record high quality audio or videos or anything like that. But that is much easier to buy than a plane ticket and everything and a sponsorship for one conference. It's about the same cost for something that will last a lot longer. So it's an investment for sure. It's kind of just depends on your team too and what those things are.
Yeah. I guess some of us like wish we were road warriors. Allie says she never got to be a road warrior, and it makes her sad.
You know, I don't know if it should make you sad. Also, hi, Allie. I think I'm glad that I did it, but at the same time, I'm just like, man, I can't believe I did that. That was exhausting. Like you burn out hardcore when you have so little time at home and you're just constantly going and there were so many times where I couldn't make plans with friends because I was just like, I might have a hackathon that week or I might have a conference that weekend or something. And so I just wouldn't do it. And I was so bad at taking vacations and stuff in general because there was always some other event on the horizon that took precedence.
Yeah. I'm personally glad I never did, partly because like when I started, I already had kids and they're young, and it's just not a lifestyle you can maintain when you have kids. So, it's just because my wife works. So like we're, as one of us has to be home in the evening. Sometimes she worked in the evening. Now she travels a lot more than me. She's the road warrior. But it just wasn't possible. If I had to live that lifestyle, it just DevRel would have been out of the question for me. So
well, I think like
moving my microphone.
Yeah.
I saw that it should be moved closer. If you can't hear me, tell me.
Thanks.
Go on.
Thanks, Allie, for the tech check. But one of the things I'm like thankful for both of you is like feel very like I'm probably sitting about 4 or 5 conferences travel wise per year right now, which I'm happy with. And then a lot of them I have the privilege of being in New York, which I totally get there's a cost of living in New York, but I do think there's something to be said for having people that live in New York or San Francisco or like Seattle, because like there's events I'm going to that are like, oh, it's in New York. I'm like, okay, I'll just go bebop down there. Like I went to like
take the A train.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, let's take the A train. Like there's an event I'm going to in Boston and it's like, oh, 2-hour Amtrak, like, okay. But it's so much less of a cost for me. And the way that we're a 2-person community team right now. And so we divide, like we have one person on the West Coast and one person on the East Coast. And so unless it's a major event, like we're considering PyCon are like one of our major events this year, one person's dividing and conquering, which makes it very flexible, very friendly, very easy. But I mean, I feel very privileged that because like, I don't know that I would sustain the road warrior lifestyle, especially as someone who I, very much admire all the work that you've done, Cassidy, with like having 17 different pursuits, like and like having all the different like things to pull on. And that's just not possible when you're doing a lot of the road warrioring. It's, or at least for me, like I know myself, that's one way to get
really hard. And I do think that like, again, pre-pandemic, there were a lot of companies that did have larger teams that would strategize that way, being like, we have some person East Coast, one person West Coast, someone Midwest, someone like London, UK and stuff, so that you could go to a more nearby place. Taylor, that I don't want to dox you, but I know that there's some great events in your area where like it was so nice when you had a team that could be spread out that way, so that the traveling was a little bit less painful. But if you were doing DevRel at a really small startup, it was all you, baby.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And
so I have speaking of DevRel, I mean, I think we've all kind of been at small startups. Like I think the experience in my limited experience with it at small startups is very different from it at another company, where I feel like small startup, you're like oftentimes the first non-technical, non like developer engineer role is DevRel. It's like, oh, okay, we don't have marketing, so we're gonna hire a DevRel. So it's DevRel's marketing and marketing ops, and and all these different different positions. They're the documentation writers, and they're the I think it's a very different experience. I mean, I don't know if you both agree.
It's very different.
Yeah.
And that was actually something where one of my roles that I had in the past was working with a VC firm and to advise their startups on DevRel and everything. And so many of the times they were just like, DevRel does that, right? And they didn't fully understand it. And I would have to say, oh, what you need is a technical writer. Oh, actually, you just need a marketing person or a social media manager. Actually, you want a community manager. Like there's so many different things that they would expect, and you kind of have to really define that early and make sure, like, if, for example, you want to go talk to a startup and work at a startup, you have to know exactly what the scope of your role is going to be. Because no matter what, you're going to be wearing lots of hats if it's a small team. But if people don't understand what DevRel is, and then they're just like, go do it, you're gonna have a hard time, and you definitely want to be able to define those guardrails so that you just don't burn out constantly.
Totally. I think not just the guardrails in terms of like what the role is, but also in terms of expectations of each thing. Like, I've done it, and I'm like, okay, yes, I can send your newsletter and manage your social media.
Right.
I'm fine just wearing a lot of those hats, but keep in mind, like, these are not areas that I'm necessarily an expert in. And so I can do it, but don't expect the level of results of somebody who is gonna actually knows what the heck they're doing.
Right, exactly.
I had a really great, actually, shout out to Maddie Stratton, because he gave me this advice when I was kind of moving upwards in my career, and I was starting to have that, like, okay, I was at, a former job, I was approached and asked, like, what don't you want to do, or what parts do you really want to lean into in your own personal growth? And he gave the advice of DevRel, the minute that someone else is assigning you your role, or they have to ask you what you're doing, is when you lose value in the company. And so being very, working in public and being very clear of what are you working on, what are you doing, and what value are you bringing, and what is your core KPI or initiative that you're tackling, that's when you can really succeed. And he really compared it to a working dog, which is like, if you've had dogs, or, if your dog or a puppy doesn't get into something and you don't give them a task to do, we now have, like, I have a 10-month-old puppy, and he currently has eaten part of our bookshelf because we left him unsupervised during a nap. And, but it was like, if you don't give the proper assignment or proper direction, that's when something is going to happen, or you're going to get into trouble. And so I think that having that initiative of like, okay, this is my core initiative, and really almost establishing it as like a pro or a con, really helped me kind of like unblock to that next level in my own personal career track, which is, again, I say that like hearing the both of you talk, and like Cassidy really relating to like how you're leaning on, understand and be very clear about kind of what you do. But I'm very curious, and it's something that I've been like kind of there, like I do own your keycap set. I've kind of followed your content. I love what you've created. I'm excited to be like everything that's going on. Yeah, it's actually, I felt bad. I should have changed out my keycaps for this. But okay. How do you balance all of the things? And especially in DevRel, where you're a very public facing person, I know that I've gotten that critique in the past of like, oh, can you be focused if you're doing comedy? Or can you be focused if you're doing this other thing? And it's like, what I do outside my 9 to 5, just because it is also online, does not impact you.
Yeah.
But how do you
that's a conversation that I've had at so many different job interviews and companies and stuff, because it's true. And then people are just like, oh, because you do work that's kind of adjacent to your day job outside of the 9 to 5, that means you're always online and working. Excellent. And so definitely setting those kinds of boundaries and stuff is tough but important, because that's just kind of the nature of the beast, especially if you do any sort of content or anything adjacent to your role. And one thing that I always talk to every company that I interview with is just like, how do you feel about side projects? And I have a doc that I keep updated of, these are all the side projects that I'm doing at any given time. And saying like, are you okay with me doing these things? Because if you're not, I don't know if this type of role is going to work. And I've gotten to a point where luckily I can be pretty clear about that, where I can say like, yes, I write the Stack Overflow newsletter. It's not going to cut into day job time. If anything, it might put our company name on the map a little bit, because lots of people read that newsletter, and that could be good for you. But it's one of those things where I have to be very, very clear about it. And I think being clear about that is so important early as well, just because a lot of companies kind of assume they buy your brand, your own personal brand in some way. And sometimes people are just like, yeah, I don't care. I don't really use social media and stuff. But then others are just like, wait, but my Twitter account stays with me after I leave the company. Not that I'm planning on leaving the company anytime soon, but I don't want it to be just like shill, and then I bounce, and then there's nothing there again. And so it's something that I straight up get in writing every single time. Like, these are the things that I do outside of work. Sometimes might overlap with some work hours, but I will always make up the time that I do, so that there is that clarity there. And some companies don't like that, and I don't work for those companies.
Yeah, I've had that same conversation at multiple companies, because I've been running CFE.dev for 5.5 years. I do multiple newsletters. I've run conferences, and it's like, all of those things I think are beneficial to my day job ultimately. But
Right.
But some companies are like less enthused about that stuff than others.
It's always
and
interesting. Like,
just
what companies
very quick
choose
note,
to
I
be.
think DevRel managers who get DevRel are just like, oh great, yeah, no, keep doing that, because they understand the value of it, and that it sometimes takes time. Go ahead, Erin. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, no, you're all good. Thank you. I was gonna say, I love that point on managers, because that has definitely been a make or break with some managers. And there was places when I was last looking for a job that like definitely butted heads on it. But I have a now page that has, much like you, like has everything that I'm working on at this current moment. And I originally started it out of like an ethics assignment that for part of the journalism school that I work at, but kind of kept up and maintained it because I felt it was really important to disclose personal bias and what I'm working on. But even that, like being said, I keep like my content open, and it's interesting because it goes both ways, because I do have a career as a comedian and I do get paid for comedy. I have had people ask if I would do my comedy work for free at their tech event.
Ooh.
And I'm like, no, like this is my hobby away from tech. Also, some of these aren't necessarily like, not that I try to keep the brand separate, but like, and I say weird brand, but like they don't necessarily mesh. But the other thing that I found is really, really interesting doing side projects is I've never had any issue with people with any of my techie work, but I have had issues because I worked in journalism, specifically political journalism. And technically, and so some companies, when they were like, don't talk politics at work, and are very like kibosh on that, because I have been public about it, I did have companies that were like, you need to remove that from your work. And I was like, I'm proud of that work I did, so too bad. Like, I don't think this is going to be a fit. That's an interesting.
That's a funky dynamic. Yeah.
For sure.
I don't like that.
It feels weird because I'm like, okay, but you're okay with every other tech thing that I post? Like,
right.
Or you want free comedy? Like,
yeah. Again, that's people trying to own who you are, and that's just not. That's not great.
Agreed.
Got a lot of questions from the audience coming in as we kind of.
Yeah. Allie actually mentioned like that she something we wanted to talk to you about. Actually, which is just so you were obviously working in DevRel, and then you moved up to lead the team at Netlify, and have since moved on to CTO. So I have a couple questions related to that. First of all, based on your experience, obviously, like you've led DevRel a couple companies, and what's the big difference between being like the head of DevRel versus being a kind of practitioner of DevRel?
An IC, individual contributor.
Yes, that's it.
Much more meetings. I feel like that's the really high level, clear answer to that. Whenever you lead anything, it means that you are in meetings, and that was honestly probably the biggest thing that when I went from individual contributor to manager director at Netlify was I was just in meetings all the time. I kind of burnt out from the meetings. That's ultimately why I left. I still love that team, and I was talking with them 5 minutes before the show. Like they're really awesome people, but I was in meetings all the time as a combination of like, okay, yes, we can try to prioritize this versus prioritizing that. It was a lot more company strategy type stuff, figuring out how do we want to strategize around content, which events do we want to prioritize, how do we want to handle these budgets and that sort of thing. And so that is honestly the main difference. It's much more high level of like the planning of the overall strategy of things versus applying the strategy and doing it. And I admit I do like just applying the strategy and doing it a little bit, but I think that's also why I really like going to startups, and the startup I'm at, Contenda, we're less than 10 people, and I love that. I love being at a really, really small team where I can still do the like hands-on work, but then also help on the strategy side of things as well.
That makes sense. And so, I mean, do you feel like your current role as CTO is significantly different than what you did leading DevRel, or does it feel kind of similar? Yeah,
it's definitely, again, when you're at a very small startup, you wear so many different hats.
Right.
And for a little bit of context of how I got to this role, because I saw that was a question in the chat as well. So Contenda is a company that I've been advising for a really long time. They actually had their 2-year anniversary this past weekend, and I've been advising them for a year and 11 months. And so like I've been advising them for a really, really long time. And they build AI tools for content creators and DevRel teams and technical marketing teams. And so, for example, if we took this live stream and put it through the Contenda AI, it would output a blog post about this live stream, or a tweet thread, or highlight clips, or things like that. And so it generates content from existing content. That's the shill spiel thing. And
ooh, I like that. I guess check this out.
Yeah, you should use us. Let me know. And so they started a while ago. I was advising them for a long time, and we kind of got to a point last year where I was talking with them so regularly about just technical things, content things, DevRel things, that it just kind of started to make sense. What if I just joined full time? Because I'm talking with them so much, it would just make sense to join full time. And so that's kind of how it happened. And because of the experience I had with leading DevRel and just leading in different spaces and engineering management experience and that sort of thing, that's kind of how the role and the title came to be. And so on the leadership side of things, I'm going to lots of like VC meetings and sales meetings and stuff. I'm managing the engineering team, which is everybody except for 2 people, so that I do one-on-ones with everybody. Until last month, I was the only front-end developer as well, so I was also building the entire front end for the product. But we hired someone, and I'm so grateful for it. And Grady, if you're here, thank you for existing. And so, and now that I'm not doing all the front end work for that, I'm doing more DevRel-y stuff too, where I'm writing more content and blog posts and actually using our product, making videos and generating content from that and that sort of thing. And so that's high level what my role is and how it came to be. And it's definitely been very different, but it's really cool to be on a small team that's working for DevRel folks and building tools that I would personally want to use in a day-to-day job, and seeing DevRel people who I like use it and be like, wait, this is awesome, and run with it.
That's super.
So That's cool.
It's
Sorry,
like
go
super
ahead.
cool.
Erin.
I was gonna say one of the things that I like hear of that, and I'm like, this is super exciting. I'm very stoked for, but I'm also like, if someone was like, Erin, you could move up the ladder and you could be like a CTO, I'd be like, holy cow, I'm gonna go shit my pants and like run away and cry a little bit. But what skills did you take from DevRel and like really apply that? And like you touched on it briefly, but has there been, holy cow, I wish someone was here to hold my hand for this, or things that you learned along this process that's a little bit different in that CTO realm?
Yeah, I think luckily a lot of my experience aligned really well with this specific role, in that I have done engineering management before, not just like at Netlify where I was leading DevRel stuff, but also just at previous jobs, I've been an engineering manager before. And so like the management side of things, I know how to do. I've done like the performance review things before and the budgeting things before, that sort of thing. I think because I've done so many startup advisory things and then just worked with VCs, the fundraising conversations, I understand how those work, and like the political dance that happens with that. And so that luckily played into the role as well. And then on the technical side, I know how to code, so that kind of worked out. And I think again, in general, because I had been working with the team part-time for so long, I just knew who they were. And so the dynamic worked really well with that team. And so it was kind of a weird hodgepodge of skills that just worked. And I feel like if anybody out there is interested in doing some kind of CTO role, I do recommend kind of dabbling in the different avenues and lanes that you might be touching in, because it's good to be technical, but you have to think about that people side of things too. And also, I dislike the political dances, but the political things of what VC looks like and what budgeting looks like and that sort of thing. And for advising startups, that's something that I didn't even know that you could just do until I think right around when the pandemic started. And I was talking to someone who his full-time job is just being an advisor to startups. And he kind of introduced me to like, oh, here's how you can kind of put yourself up for advisory roles and that sort of thing. And that kind of led me down that path, which was really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't even know that was a possibility either.
Yeah, it's really fun because you can, it's like companies come to you and say, we're thinking about doing X, Y, or Z. Which one should you pick? Or which one would you pick if you were us? And I'd say Z, and here's why. And then we discuss it, and then they just go build it, and it was awesome. And so it's one of those things where like you can really help guide a direction, and then products work in the way that you kind of hope that they will. And it's just a fun to work with people. I hear a puppy.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I thought Chris was supposed to get rid of that. It usually does, but it's not.
It's all good. I was gonna say mine's currently snoring on the couch. He's got a rough life.
Yeah,
yeah. At least he's not eating your cabinet there.
Yeah, he's not. He made it off the bookcase today, off to gremlin activities of another sort. It's hard being a puppy. But
my bubble tea has arrived.
Oh, wonderful! It's like I'm like I need this. How do I get the sneaky? Where's the button that's like the sneaky boba delivery?
I want just like bubble tea to arrive. That sounds amazing.
I know, right?
I keep trying it. It's like I'm like
I've got this empty cup that keeps showing up. Come on.
I know. There's going to be the SOS. Please, shared office partner, my office mate, aka my husband. Where's the coconut LaCroix?
Erin, I think you had a couple questions from the audience, right?
Anyway.
Anyway, sorry for that.
Distracting.
Bubble tea. We got excited about puppies and bubble tea.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I think for the first one, first off, I'm going to toss this one from Joshua Garcia. How do you juggle DevRel and writing papers on quantum mechanics? And I will toss in, you've done YouTube, you've done keyboards, you've done so many other things. How does your brain manage it all? And I've been a huge fan of watching kind of some of your talks to see behind the scenes. But if you could break down, what does a typical day in Cassidy look like in all the projects? Also, Josh is a friend of mine, a major troll who always asks me about quantum mechanics. I don't know anything about quantum mechanics. I was going to say, I was like, I love that. I love that. Yeah, no, it's surprise. I was like, wow, that's so cool because I'm even more.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm like,
Look at her
I
go.
thought I knew all her side projects, but I didn't know she was.
I know. I was like, wait, I'm pretty sure I haven't heard that side project yet.
Freaking Josh, who's probably just like cackling by himself right now. Anyway, so but in terms of side projects and everything that are not quantum mechanics related, honestly, I just keep a really strict calendar and I try to obey it. Where like I set aside time specifically throughout the week to do all the things that I want to do, and I think by following that, it has really kind of kept me accountable to myself a little bit. Where, for example, every Wednesday at a certain hour, I write the Stack Overflow newsletter. Even if it means I have to put it off later in the day, it will happen on Wednesday, and I have like a meeting time for that. And I've kind of made myself and use a variety of different tools where if I'm really stressed, I use just a paper notebook and write down like this is my task list for the day. Otherwise, I have this app that I made for myself called To Do Meter that it's truly just a to-do app with a progress bar, but it works for me. And I put in like these are all the things that I want to do for the day. Whenever I put it off, there's a pause button and then it just goes into like a do later section. Otherwise, everything on that list I have to do. And then that's truly just where it all is. I use Obsidian for taking notes and I try to do all of the things in Obsidian so it's all in one place. And then Raindrop, which I talked to you about this before the show. Raindrop is for bookmarks where I categorize and organize every single link and thing that I can into Raindrop. And I think between all of those tools and then the last one is Centered. I really love Centered. It's also a glorified to-do list app, but it has like a flow state tracker where you can hit start and it'll play like the ambient music to help you focus. And then you can add a web extension that'll say like, should you be on Twitter right now? And stuff like that. And so it kind of directs your focus a little bit. And I need that sometimes. And so between all of these things, that's kind of how it all gets done.
I think you already answered to my.
I was going to say you answered like the favorite tools to do DevRel because like Centered sounds just like a version of I use the sessions.io app, which I say has the idiot alarm, which is the should you really be on Twitter right now? Because it's the Pomodoro style, and then it gives you 5 minutes of break time. But then it goes
that's a lot.
really loudly.
Yeah. I tried that. It didn't I tried Centered. It didn't work for me at all.
Yeah. With Centered it's very similar to that, but you need someone more mean.
I need like I need the like the idiot alarm of should you really be doing this? Like the really loud, and it shows up in your what is it called? The menu bar up at the top of your Mac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it shows and then like with Centered you can choose different voices. I am one of the voices on there, but like you could have Kent C. Dodds saying like, "Hey, you should stop," or like various other people in the tech industry or not in the tech industry. There's just some really funny people who made little voice packs that you can use to yell at you when you lose focus, and it's genuinely helpful for me because sometimes I'll just block off on my calendar like flow time and it'll just go through my list and I kind of just stay focused on that task at a given time.
Yeah, I think it didn't work for me because maybe this is partly why I ended up in DevRel. I don't know, because I'm kind of all over the place constantly. My thinking time is often, and I get stuck and I just switch tasks to something sort of mindless. But I'm like processing, and before I go back, I'm like, okay, I think I got it now, and I'm ready to go back. But I if you watch me, I'm like, this is why I don't stream me coding, because it would be a torturous exercise to watch for anybody. It's like I'm switching things all the time. I just don't stay focused, but I get the stuff done. But I do.
That's what matters in the end.
Yeah, I do follow what you like. For my side projects, I always have I have a very set time when I do it, and like I've even found I'm usually averse to working at all on the weekends, but like that's my time for like I found like Sunday morning I wake up and I'm like, yeah, okay, that's my time to do CFE stuff. So like that's usually when I do all the stuff for this site.
Yeah, that's when I write my newsletter or Sunday evening, because then I'm just like I'm kind of ramping up for the work week to start, and then I ship it whatever Sunday night and then go to bed.
Yeah, I need the the Sunday, and by the way, we'll drop all the links. We're sharing them currently in Discord right now. There's a link somewhere in this. I'm like, is it down the side or the bar, depending on how your YouTube streaming preference is. We're just dropping all these links in there, so you'll have them for later. But yeah, I'm very much a Sunday night worker as well, and I'm getting better at the calendar blocks. I used to avoid it for the longest period of time.
Yeah.
In the unfiltered real talk section of why we're not a professional branded podcast. It's the currently on the low-key ADHD medication shortage has been the struggle. So it's been a 9 to 5. Like, I'm never someone who will work a 9 to 5. And I've been very explicit with employers about that. Like, the idea of working at night, like logging in right at 9 a.m. and logging out at 5 terrifies me. And that's never how I'm going to do my best work. But I'm usually like, I will do a 7:30 and then I might take a workout in the middle of the day. And then I might do this. And then I will be back on at the night. But you don't want to see my work after me staring at it for 3 hours, because I did that last week and I tried to build a Slack bot and I broke it 4 different ways because I copied the wrong API code because I was trying to do it. And it was a very stupid, easy fix that it was like one of those ones you come back to your computer and you're like, you idiot.
That hurts my heart. Don't get me started. But it's real. It's real. And it's one of those things. And that is actually something that, once again, I love about startups, because they tend to be more flexible about that. Where on our team, we're kind of just like, I need to go for a walk. And then we just kind of let people know. And as long as people generally know, can I contact you now or not? That's kind of how we operate. And it's nice to have that sort of flexibility at work, because then if, for example, you're just like, this is a side project day, I don't think I could do it, you make up the time. And as long as things are done by a deadline, that's what matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been very fortunate.
Yeah,
to work.
We're very spoiled in tech.
Very spoiled.
We are, but Elon Musk is here telling us, it's going to take it all back, right? Like, we're going back. I love that there was like a New York Times or Washington Post article about like how all the tech CEOs behind the scenes were like rooting for him because they thought we were all spoiled.
But so I did interview one place, and I'm not going to name names, and that was one of their non-negotiables, is that I was in an office. And part of my pushback is like, one, I was like, first off, part of the reason I've worked so long remote is it is an accessibility thing for me. Like, I do have, learning things that make it much more efficiently. 2, you can ask my husband, who works hybrid, and he is very fortunate. He's in media, as an editorial manager, and goes to the office once a week. But you can ask him. I am sometimes a really annoying office mate. Like, I tap my feet. I am screaming and talking to myself. I'm up and down. I take laps when I'm stuck on something. I tap my pen. I have a loud keyboard. He's like, I have a sound effect bar I do play during meetings because I think it makes meetings more fun. Yeah. So if I'm also just a really annoying office mate. So
I've learned about myself that I just talk to everybody. And
yes.
And I like it. It's fun. I enjoy it. But I've realized, if you want me to get work done, you're going to want to let me work.
Put me from home.
You'll talk your ear off if you let me.
So Erin, you're like, I'm advocating for me to work from home for you, not for me.
Yeah, that's exactly how I am.
I'm like, you a favor.
You a favor. Yeah. No, my husband's like, wait, because I got like when I got upgraded my headphones from I got headphones from like a work stipend, and they mailed me noise canceling headphones. He's like, those should have been for me. You don't need those. He's like, you forget to charge your headphones half the time. Like, those should have been mine. But yes, I'm very much, I should work from home for everybody else's sanity. But I mean, on that point, Cassidy, like, I'm a very social person, but I'm probably an ambivert. Like, I'm not as extroverted as many people think.
I'm an introvert that is outgoing.
Yeah. So I'm an outgoing person, but like, I need to recharge. Like, I need, and so if I'm really stressed about something or not focusing on something, everybody will know, because I'm like, don't talk to me, or I'll get really quiet. And they're like, and I've worked in an office before where they're like, are you okay? Like, is something wrong? You
just gotta like shut out the wolf so that way you can recharge again.
Yeah, but it's so interesting. But I know we're kind of coming up here on
we're coming up on time. So we got 2 things we got to get to, because Joshua came back to troll you some
He
more.
came back. Hey, Josh.
He wants to know your favorite tech pun, and I know you do have a lot of those. It's like always in the newsletter.
Yeah.
I was going to say I love so many
Pun's
of them.
great
It's
in
kind
this
of hard. It's hard for me to name a favorite. I think the first one that always comes to mind is just Spider-Man as a web developer. It's a classic. It's so good. I
Yeah, this is a good
no
one.
notes. Yeah.
It is a good one.
And then, okay, we got to finish. Well, we gotta do our pickle fact corner, which I promised I would get like a graphic for like when we do pickle fact time, but like
That's okay.
it hasn't.
Guess you just got to tune in next time, folks. Tune in next time
Yeah.
or maybe the time after
Don't
that
make
for a
promises.
pickle
I
fact
can't.
graphic.
I can't.
Pickles.
I said next time, or maybe the time after that, or maybe sometime in the future, indefinitely,
Yeah, you have to
for
stay
a pickle
on.
fact graphic, or just me talking about pickles, or someone else talking about pickles.
But
All right.
I have so many words about pickles, and I would love to bring the pickle fact today, if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. Please.
Yes, please.
So, pickles are great. We all know this. This is something that is actually a core fundamental thing of America that people might not know, because even though pickles have been around forever, since like 2000 BC or something like that, America was actually named after a pickle peddler, Amerigo Vespucci. He was just like, everybody should be eating pickles. It's really good for like scurvy on ships and stuff like that. He was really selling pickles and pushing pickles all the time. And he came to the U.S. and was just, he came to the U.S. before it was even named, and they ended up naming the country after him. Like America is named America because of Amerigo Vespucci, this pickle peddler. And people were just like, wait, shouldn't this be United States of Colombia? But it was too late, and pickles are driving us to
So you're saying like it's in our foundation. It's like it's a foundation.
It's a core part of us as Americans because of Amerigo, because of pickles.
I think that is an absolutely amazing pickle fact, and you've now ruined all pickle facts for the show going forward.
Yeah, you're like, and the rest of all these pickle facts are going to just be me frantically Googling about pickles.
I like how Nick said, in gherkins we trust. That's right.
Yep. That's what we saved this for the end, because that's what like Nick, that's what most people are just here for the pickle facts.
Most people just come here for the pickle facts, and maybe you learn something in the process.
Yeah.
DevRel is like, secondary to everything else.
I now wanted to say it as it would be a Greek god, pickles like Hercules. I really relish this episode. I know we've got kind of a big deal going here.
Oh God.
This episode was a big deal.
Big deal. We had I feel like we got a good crunch into the world of what it takes to lead DevRel teams.
Yeah, I might have to just click end broadcast before.
That's a Vlasic pun.
Like my brain is like trying to run fast of like, how can I come up with a pickle pun that has tech in it in the next 3 minutes?
Well, tech is our bread and butter, so.
It's only natural.
Yeah, now you bring up sweet pickles, and that's really where
I only like them on like really spicy chicken sandwiches. Sweet pickles on spicy chicken sandwiches, that's where they belong. Otherwise, no. Mm-mm.
So when people we discovered in the last episode, so Brian reached out and was like, "You'd like this thing with me?" And we came up with the idea of DevRelish. And then I never told Brian until our first episode live together that my pandemic hobby was pickling, like fermentation. So that was when everybody was making sourdough, I was making weird pickle things in my cabinet. I live in like New York, so I had a tiny cupboard, and we only had like 3 closed cabinets. And I cleaned out all of our pots and pans one week during the pandemic, because who needs them in a cabinet? Because you have to keep, on certain types of fermentation, you have to keep your jars dark and in a cabinet. And my husband was like, "What the hell are you doing? You have 3 rows of pickle jars." And so now it is a thing, and pickled asparagus is my top tier item.
Ooh.
Along with,
I could see that being good.
So good. Pickled asparagus, and I make a fermented Bloody Mary meal.
Yeah, that sounds pretty great. That sounds really, really good.
Maybe we'll do a
Yeah,
cooking day one day.
Yeah.
I love pickled mushrooms. But anyway, now we're getting so distracted on
Okay. Anyway,
stuff.
thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you for being here. This
Thank
was
you for
so much
joining
fun.
us.
Yeah, and yeah. So in best, I don't know if like you're going to be on not vacation. You're going to be gone off work in a month. Is this public news or?
Yeah, it can be. I'm pregnant. I'm going on mat leave in like a month.
Yes.
And so I might not, maybe I'll get really into pickles then, but I will be a shill. If anybody wants to try Content Dev for stuff, if you click the Yeehaw button on our homepage, that can put you on the wait list. Or you can message me and we can get you a key, a friends and family key, because we're still in early access, but you can try it out if you want.
Okay. I will be messaging you because this sounds awesome.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be messaging you for that. So keep tuned. And we've dropped all the links today in the Discord. So if you've missed this or you are like me and you open the links and then you close them later and you think that you're going to remember them, you could use Cassidy's really rad tool that she is shilling called Raindrop, or just join us on Discord and then add them to Raindrop. But
yeah,
either or do both, because that's a good idea too.
Yeah. I always,
right.
if it's not written down, I will forget it. So, yeah. But anyway, thank you again for having me.
Okay.
Thank you
Thanks,
so much
Cassidy.
for joining us.
And for those of you still watching, we'll be back in next month. I'll get it scheduled soon, and I will work on that pickle graphic. I promise it'll happen.
I can't wait.
Thank you so much for the conversation, and please keep in touch, everyone.
See y'all
Bye,
later.
all.
Bye.